And over time, he figured that I would be material for the Stasi to recruit. And he thinks the Stasi then shared that information with the KGB. This fellow took me to the Soviet Army headquarters in Berlin, and that was also the KGB headquarters. Initially, the KGB recruited me clearly with the intent of sending me to West Germany. My ego got flattered so much by being recruited by the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet. Oh, all of this was just an offer that was too hard to say no to, and I had no idea what I really signed up for.
So we'd love to start off with a Patreon question. They're biggest supporters of the show, and it's a chance for some of the fans to ask you specifically a question. And starting off here, one of the questions was, how do you determine who can be trusted in a high-stakes espionage type environment?
You can't trust anybody, okay? You just can't. We call this amongst the cognoscenti. We call the espionage world the mirrors. We call the espionage world the wilderness of mirrors. It's because there's instinctively, that you can trust somebody in the moment, but not forever. And then the instinct comes with having interacted with a lot of people and developed a feel for others. This world is based on lies, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, ironically, it also requires trusting people. If you don't trust people, you can't do espionage. You got to trust somebody to do the right thing. The KGB trusted me till the very end, but I was untrustworthy.
That's actually a question I kind of want to follow up with then. How do you convince people to trust you?
Well, there's one thing that works really well. If you have a long-term relationship and you voluntarily admit mistakes that you've made that nobody else knows about. I just screwed up. I did this, and this. And I did this with my first handler. I did this a lot. He became sort of like a father figure to me, a benign father figure, not like my dad who beat me up when I didn't behave. And I confided every weakness to him. I confided every mistake, and I also bragged about my successes. And so he thought I was a very trustworthy individual. And you got to be authentic. You must not change, based on who you're talking with. You need to stay your authentic self. And follow through. If you promise something, you need to deliver on it. And I was very good at that.
So let's get into the background with one simple question. Who are you?
You borrowed that from 60 Minutes.
Yeah, I loved it too much.
Now the answer is a little different. I am the result of two separate personalities that managed to converge and become an authentic Jack Barsky / Albrecht Dittrich, which is my German name. I'm an American. I'm more American now than I was when I first started pretending to have been one. I'm an American with German roots. And it happened only very recently. I got to a point where I really like Jack Barsky, which makes a big difference in one's life when you learn how to like yourself.
Can you detail that a little bit more? Because this is actually a question that, and we talked a lot offline about, James Lawler and, he's previous guest on the show and your relationship with him as well. One of the things we talked about very early in that podcast was the idea of getting into character, to be able to be the persona that was set forward to be. And, you kind of highlighted there that you're starting, or recently we're really starting to like the character Jack Barsky. What is your process, or what was your process in terms of getting into that character? And with that, how do you either become said character, or how does said character become you?
Well, when I first came here, and that the moment I set foot on the United States, I pretended to have been born here. So that was one heck of an experiment. You can't test drive that, right? But instinctively, I knew that I couldn't pull this off. So it took me about 5-6 years to be comfortable pretending this with anybody, so to speak, because I had to learn American culture. I had to learn how Americans behave, and all of this I wasn't taught in the Soviet Union and Russia. And I was not very deliberate. And there was a situation when I thought I was already very comfortable in my American skin, when a good friend of mine pulled me aside one day. He was a friend and a colleague at work, and he told me that he likes me a lot, and it's good working with me. But then he said, "Just stop acting like an a-hole." And I went like, huh? And as he elaborated, I realized that this was vestiges of my German behavior, the in-your-face critical nastiness, and I will tell you what I don't like about you, even though you don't ask. So again, it was me becoming an American was through playful experiment, so to speak. I am now clearly more American than German. I've figured this one out when I went back to Germany after so many years, and I interacted with old friends and classmates from college, and I figured, my God, they're so negative. And the one thing that instinctively I developed, Americans have this private space. You must not get into that private space when you talk to somebody, unless you want to kiss a girl. But they have no problem with that private space. They get really close to you, and I'd like to have that finger in your face. So when I became comfortable with who I am was fundamentally after I got kicked out of the corporate world. See, I knew way back when in East Germany, I was a really a student. I was smart. I was very, very well liked, but I really didn't have a clue of whatever intrinsic value I might have. And you can't find that out in the corporate world, because in the corporate world, everybody wears a mask. Even if you don't want to wear a mask, but you got to play the game. If you don't play the game, you're not doing well. There's too much politics, in particularly in large hierarchies. And I spend a lot of time in large hierarchies. So people either, dominate you because they're bossy, or they're kissing your butt because they think they can gain from being liked. Mm-hmm. So when I left my last corporate job and became an entrepreneur this late in life, I started interacting with people that are not corporate animals. And particularly at least one network that I belong to, where I got feedback based on who I am. Now, here's the thing. My past acts like a magical key. It opens a lot of doors. Because, people when they hear, what, KGB? I want to hear about it. So the door opens, you get into the room, you don't get to stay very long unless you can provide continued value. And I've been invited to stay many times and got feedback from people that I say, I'm shaking my head. They really think I'm this, and this? Wow, there must be something to it. Because, this is the environment that I'm operating in now is when people take the mask off, mm-hmm. Okay? And once you get that kind of a feedback, then you get to a point where you embrace what they are feeding you back, and you stop thinking you're an imposter. And you're familiar with the word imposter syndrome. I've been diagnosed with that syndrome many, many times over. And I'm still not bragging about self, but I am comfortable when asked, telling people what I think my strengths are, and inviting them to confirm or deny, because I'm comfortable now, which makes me more interesting to interact with, more successful to interact with. I wish I had been there many, many years ago, and you are way ahead of me at your young age. So
I don't know about that, but
come to trust me. Don't do the imposter thing with on me here.
I appreciate it. I guess a question with that, because you bring up the mask, and it's so interesting because I think a lot of people. Would you say that your training and background, which we'll get into here in a sec, almost puts you at a disadvantage in that you have that ability to recognize those that are wearing the mask all around you, especially whether it's in the corporate world, but even just in general life?
Yeah, well, the one thing that I was good at very early on, I could smell a phony from a mile away. I don't know if that's something that you're born with. It probably has a lot to do with paying attention. And I was the one thing I was born with. It was curiosity, and there is no other object in the world that is worthy more of being curious about than people. So even as a child, I was always watching. I was a people watcher, and so my parents, when we went to a restaurant, they would occasionally say, "Stop staring," because I was looking at the people in the next table and was trying to figure out what might they do next and how would they interact with each other. So I collected a lot of behaviors, human behaviors, and potentially also long-term what happened that if somebody displayed a certain like a body language or facial expressions, and eventually they turned out to be either good or bad. When generally not. I can't read people to a degree. I'm not purposely reading body language, but my subconscious collected all that information, and so I'm pretty good. Nobody is ever 100% at reading people the moment I meet them. And that can even be on the phone. And I this is not bragging. I have proved to myself that this is the truth, because when I spent about 20 years as a manager, director, executive in corporate America, and obviously I interviewed and hired a lot of people. And Initially, I would do technical interviews. I asked them, I wanted to find out if they knew what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. Then I stopped doing that because I told them up front, if you can't do what's on your resume, you're not going to last very long here. So I just, the heck with that. And then I went more into the psychological interviews, why you're leaving the job, where you want to switch jobs, describe your best boss and your worst boss, and that's like an HR type interview. I got tired of that, and eventually I just did small talk. So it could be about any subject, yesterday's football game or, gardening, pets. And that was a really odd interview. The interviewee's like, what is this guy is like a vice president? He's talking about gardening. But all I wanted to find out whether it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And typically for me to figure this one out, there were about 4 things I was probing for, not with direct questions. Are they smart? Are they honest? Are they a cultural fit? And do they have drive? Okay? That's the type of person I wanted. And the reason I'm saying I have proof, I hired, and also sometimes not hired, people based on nothing but that small talk. And I was 99% successful. The one time I failed was when I allowed my conscious, logical mind to override my gut instinct. The moment that candidate stepped into my office and opened his mouth, my gut feeling said, I don't like him. So he struck me like highly unlikable person. But there was some mitigating circumstances. His resume was outstanding. And as I was talking to him, he was talking a little bit about the work that he did. And he had a skill set that I desperately needed. And I had managed, at that time, I had managed a lot of nerds. By the way, that's a term of endearment for me. You know, I love nerds. I used to be one myself. So, and nerds very often have a hard time interacting with the people on the other side of the nerd wall, you know, the people that are not nerds, and they can't find a common language. So I figured he may have been one of those, I rationalized, he may have been one of those misunderstood nerds. So I hired him. And what I did, I was chief information officer. I reported to the CEO, and I shielded him from HR as well as the CEO. Let him do what he does, and he did good work. Within a year, he became Employee of the Year.
Really?
A year later, he was in the office of my boss, the CEO, and demanded that I be fired. So my instinct was right on the money. And that was such a bad situation that I actually had to quit the company, you know, to get away, because the CEO could not make a decision. She took him away from under me and gave me not so very important things to manage. Where the people that like infrastructure, my infrastructure guy was so good he didn't need to be managed, so I had to just leave. So, you know, that's my proof, and that doesn't mean, as I said, that doesn't mean I'm not I'm perfect. I fell for a couple of guys who I thought were really, really great. One of them stabbed me in the back, and the other one wound up stealing money from me. So you know, you have to, don't ever believe that you're perfect.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty damn good.
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, relating this to espionage, what do you think is the role and the ability to read people? You know, it's kind of a bridge from trust in the ability to kind of read.
Oh, it's absolutely 100% important, particularly in my situation, because I was very vulnerable. You know, for the folks that have diplomatic protection, at least you know, they're not in danger when they make a false assessment, but they don't have an offensive weapon either. They need to know how to approach people that you know, may be valuable for our side, whichever side you're on. For me, it was a survival skill. You know, particularly initially, I had the good instinct not to get too close to smart people, to highly observant people, and particularly to women who were born in the United States, because I sense, and I think this is right, because women are more intuitive than men. That's okay. And so they would have figured out, you know, something is not quite right about you. I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, that bike trip for 6 weeks. That bike trip. You are. This was an inside joke, by the way. The audience doesn't know this. When I told my, I don't know I wasn't married yet. I was dating a lady that eventually became my wife, and she was from Guyana, South America. And when I went back to Moscow for 6 weeks, I told her I was going on a bike trip. I also actually told the office that I took the entire vacation, and I wouldn't be accessible because I'm just going to go on a bike trip. That worked, but they weren't really close. And one time it happened to me that a good friend of mine, and he was the only one who actually approached me that way. He came to my office and he closed the door and he said, "Jack, there's something not right about you. I can't put my finger on it, and I won't try to find out,
but something just doesn't add up, and I don't even know what it is. And when I finally started working with the FBI, he was the first after my family who I told, man, you were right. Something wasn't quite the way it was, the way I painted it to be. So, but yeah, again, to close the loop, reading people well was a survival skill. And the fact that I survived 19 years without being discovered and without tripping up, it's A, my ability to read people, and B, I may have some Irish genes because I got lucky too.
So let's jump into your early life growing up, at a time where we're seeing communism versus capitalism, that the height of that ongoing battle. And, you happen to be born on the other side of the wall for some of the people that we've had on this podcast and everything. So can you speak to your early life, what it was like growing up, kind of under the veil of communism and I guess the Soviet Union as a whole?
Yeah. Just to start out with, I used to say, and I have to correct myself now as the game goes on, I used to say I was born in poverty. It depends on your frame of reference. With regard to the reference to if I had grown up in the West, I would have had a better life. However, in the context of East Germany, where I grew up, we were comfortably upper middle class. I wasn't aware of it because my parents were both teachers. Teachers were well paid. I lived in houses as long as I could remember. The houses were attached to school buildings, but they were like homes with gardens and everything. My father was the first one who had a motorcycle in the village, and then we moved to a small town. He was the first one with a car, and we had vacations on the Baltic Sea. Where the poverty kicked in was the food was lousy, and no matter how much money you had, the food was rationed, so you could buy only this much, and also the medical profession was severely handicapped in terms of what they could do to treat you. It was really, really tough love. But other than that, it was not a bad childhood with regard to being out playing, with regard to being in good schools. We had really, really a very good education. The ones that were bright enough went on to high school and college, and it was all free. And I didn't feel oppressed, other than I've always been an anti-authoritarian, and I challenged authority, and that was beaten out of me rather quickly. So when I misbehaved, and my father got wind of it, he beat me up with a belt. Mm-hmm. All right. So smart enough I was, so I adjusted my behavior. But the worst threat to my existence in that country was when I challenged teachers a lot in my second year in high school. I was smarter than all my teachers. Now they knew more, right? They taught us stuff that we didn't know, but I was more talented intellectually.
And curious.
And I would ask, like a good German, very aggressive questions of them that they very often couldn't answer. Mm-hmm. My math teacher learned the math while he was teaching it, and he always walked around with a book, and he copied from the book to the blackboard. And so one day I raised my hands, and I asked him, it was some boring part of math, a lot of routine stuff. There was no fun about it. And I raised my hand, yes, Mr. Dittrich, what can I do for you? I said, why the heck do we have to learn all this crap? Something in German like that. And his face went red. Next thing I was in the principal's office. He read me the riot act. And at the end of the school year, there was the assembly of all the students of the high school, and me and one other fellow were asked to go in the middle of that circle, and we were issued a severe reprimand and threatened with expulsion. That is when I knew I had to change in order to have a future, and I did.
What was your understanding then of, especially as someone that questions authoritarian figures or just authoritarianism in general, what was your understanding of the idea of communism, capitalism, the USA as you were growing up?
Well, if you are subject to brainwashing from kindergarten on, mind you, you know the truth. There was no alternative to the truth available. There was some of the truth leaking in, but it was more cultural. You know, we all loved rock and roll, and blue jeans were in demand, but you couldn't buy them in East Germany. But the truth that communism was far superior to any other human structure, and was the most benign, the most caring way of dealing with people and running a nation. And that started from kindergarten, and it was really, really well done. You know, initially in kindergarten, you had these little figures, like in cartoons, baby-type cartoons. And there were very subtle messages in there, you know, that we all are a team, we're all a collective, we all like one another. And oh, by the way, there was not an iota of racism involved. That was one positive thing I have to credit the communists for. Every time there was a picture of a child, there was usually 3 of them: white, brown, and yellow. But it was we knew that we were in a good place in kindergarten. Now, once elementary school, we also knew that, you know, part of becoming a member of the Young Pioneer Organization would prepare us for life down the road, because young pioneers, and we had a whole list of how young pioneers behave, and this was more preparing us for an authoritarian state, discipline, but being kind to everybody, and so, like, it was still based on feeling good about yourself, being part of the collective. And by the way, just as a sidebar here, there's a lot of positive elements in communist ideology, which plays very well with the romantic notion that young people have about life, right? Can't we all get along? Of course. It's just we need to take care of the people that rule us, because they're the evil ones. We need to fight them. So as this went on, now we are in high school. Now we have civics lessons, and we have literature, and we have geography, and everyone. We didn't have communist math, by the way. I think there's a type of math now that applies to dark-skinned people in this country nowadays, and white, racist math, right? We didn't have that, no communist math. But almost, science was raw. Science was taught without, changing the message. But all the other subjects had parts of communist propaganda in it. Literature, but civics. And we had this, civics was pretty hardcore. And at that time, if you were in high school, you had to be a member of the communist communist youth movement. That was a must. And when you turned 18, you could even join the party, the Communist Party. And then there were like these extracurricular activities that you could be engaged in, like sports, like paramilitary organization. We had also a organization that was called the German Soviet Friendship Society, and there was ideology involved in all of them. And here comes a couple of things that really convinced me. By the time I joined the KGB, I was joining the most noble cause in the history of man. So again, this was very cleverly done by the ruling Communist Party in East Germany in our junior year in high school. And we're talking about, we were the coming elite. We were the next generation that would run the country. So this is what they did. There was a mandatory visit for us, for every junior class, to go visit a concentration camp.
Really?
Yes. And if you ever had a glimpse what those concentration camps looked like and what the exhibits looked like when you walked in there, it is gut-wrenching. So we visited Buchenwald. So we went with a bus to first the city of Weimar, which is one of the cities with the most cultural heritage, German heritage. Our two national writers, authors, and geniuses lived there, Goethe and Schiller. And then, not too far from there is the concentration camp Buchenwald. So we went by bus there, and we expected that this would be unpleasant. Well, it was significantly more than unpleasant. The main hall, there was a rotunda. You walk in there, it hit you so hard. There were big posters with photographs pasted all around, and what you saw there were piles of corpses. There are people like so emaciated that you saw all the bones, and it was like, it squeezed your heart. And the ladies in our class started crying, and us guys, we just became very quiet. And then there was a hostess, or a host, I don't know if it was male or female, that pointed out two exhibits that were even more gruesome because they were real. One of them was a couple of lampshades that made out of human skin, and they had tattoos on them. And we were told that these lampshades were made on request of the wife of the commandant, who picked incoming prisoners based on the tattoos that they had, and they were killed and skinned. And this was explained to us in detail. It made you even worse off as far as your feeling, and generated something that I didn't think I had in me: hatred for these evil people. And the last exhibit was even more real. Two glass cases with shrunken heads inside, fist size. They were shrunken to the size of my fist, of real heads that were once sitting on a person's shoulder. Okay, and now put the dot on the I. And whoever came up with this idea, this was absolutely brilliant. And at the end, we were shown some one crematorium and also one gas chamber, and one not a cell. It was bigger than a cell, where people would be brought in to supposedly be measured. And there was a measuring stick at the end, and when people were standing next to it, that measured what put on their head, and based on where they were, where the head was, a hole opened, and they were shot in the back into the neck. And this is the dot on the I. The leader of the Communist Party, who was arrested by the Nazis when they took over and put in jail, was moved to that concentration camp, and about 2 weeks prior to the end of World War II was executed that way. And it is a historic truth that before the Nazis came to power, the communists were the only force that fought them physically in the streets. That doesn't mean that the communists were any better. And if they had come to power, they would have been better. No, Stalin proved that they're just as evil. It was just one side against the other. But to us, they were the fighters of the evil people. And so when the KGB came to me, I knew that I would be joining just such a noble cause. One more thing. This was the feelings. Now comes the intellect. In college, we had to take a couple of courses. One was economics, was Marxist economics, and one was called Scientific Marxism-Leninism.
What a name.
And we were taught that Marx and Engels particularly discovered a natural law that governs the evolution of human society, starting from the hunters and gatherers to slavery to I forgot the right word for it when agriculture was done.
Like feudalism?
Yeah, feudalism. Thank you. To capitalism, to socialism and communism, and so we were so brainwashed that we believed that this was scientific as well. So I was in not only emotionally but also intellectually. Mm-hmm. Boy, did I have to make a 180 over time.
Yeah, that's incredible. I had never. I mean, both of those framings is especially with the Holocaust. It's such an opportune example because obviously, and we're going to touch on this here in a sec, like what the consequences for Russia and the Soviet Union of World War II were, but to utilize both of those and especially creating such a scientific foundation to the idea of Marxism and communism and, kind of like a natural human progression towards there. I mean, if you're learning that all your life, it's really hard to question why is the U.S. not the bad guy?
Give me any near empty brain, any brain that understands language, and I can make that person believe anything over time, assuming that brain is not subject to conflicting opinions. And I was not.
Did you ever have any? So we had Drago, probably mispronounced his last name, Zoran. I cannot do it, but he was in communist Poland, and he ended up being a political prisoner. He went against, but his mom, and specifically, there was a lot of individuals around him that would provide an insight into the truth. Did you ever have any experiences where someone said, "Hey, maybe this is what we're thinking, maybe isn't reality," or were you just
the only person who occasionally bitched and moaned a little bit was my mother. But she knew that she had to keep that in check because we had a good life. My father was principal of the middle school that I attended. And she knew that if she didn't have enough of a foundation, okay, because we didn't have any relatives in the West, so there was no exposure from the West coming to us. And if I listened to Western radio, or if she did, that was mostly for the music. So whatever she didn't like, she grew up in a Christian household, by the way, and she early on sang in a church choir when the churches were never canceled in East Germany. They were watched very closely. But when she got married to my father and he had he was in the party already, had career opportunities, she quit that choir. But she picked up bits and pieces and just like bitched and moaned, and I ignored that because she was wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay, I knew better as a teenager, and when the other thing that made me not question the regime at all. Very soon, when I started college, and I was really very successful in my first semester and became one of the top students, if not the top student, I knew I was going to join the elite. So there's some elitism that also.
You don't want to mess up a good thing type of
Well,
thing.
but elitism means that, I would be one of the good guys who take care of all the dumb people that can't take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
This was all well meant. So, but you put this all together, I was the perfect recruit for the KGB.
What did you understand growing up as well then about some of those key figures, KGB, Stasi? Was there really any information, or, I mean, obviously today, we have visuals on podcasts, but
bits and pieces. Okay, I know that there were certain heroes of the KGB that became public knowledge. The most important one to us Germans was a fellow named Richard Sorge. He was a German communist, but when the Nazis came to power, he kept his communist beliefs, but he played along, and he became a journalist in Japan and made really good connections and volunteered for the KGB. And he smuggled a ton of information out that could have been more useful to Stalin if he had believed all of it. And he was eventually discovered and executed by the Japanese. He was legend to us. There were a couple of instances where I forgot the name. There was one KGB agent who came out in public simply because he managed to escape prison in Great Britain. Other than that, they didn't really profile a lot of people. But there was another person who became very famous, who was by the name of Günther Guillaume, who was a Stasi agent who was an illegal and reached to the highest levels of West German government. He became the advisor to Chancellor Willy Brandt. And when Guillaume was discovered, Brandt had to resign. Well, obviously, you couldn't deny that this guy existed. When he came back into East Germany, he was celebrated as a hero. But generally, what we knew about the folks that were operating, particularly Stasi, most East German secret police, came out of TV and fiction. We had our own version of James Bond. So there was this illegal who joined the troops, the German troops at the end of World War II, and moved to West Germany as a communist already. And he then integrated very well in Western society. He had a great career in that country. He was wealthy. He got big cars, lived in nice mansions, and he got a lot of girls. That was our version of James Bond. And so he also hunted down Nazis. He was very successful. That was the romantic notion that I bought into.
So was there, and I was actually just about to circle back to this as well, because the concept of them utilizing one of the concentration camps for propaganda is remarkable.
Yeah.
But was there an effort to somewhat create a relationship or find similarities between the West and the Nazi Party? Was there supposed to be a relationship there?
That's thanks for asking that question. Absolutely. And this is where I strongly believe that the United States, whoever made that decision, made in what we call in tennis an unforced error. There was a fellow by the name of Reinhard von Gehlen, a Nazi general who was in charge of intelligence on the Eastern Front. He should have been part of, should have partaken in the Nuremberg trial as one of the major, Nazi criminals. He was not. CIA, who knows, the President of the United States, whoever made that decision decided that he was way too useful with all that he knew about the Soviet army, the military. So they co-opted him and his entire organization as advisors. This guy wound up eventually as the head of the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the West German version of the CIA. Well, we knew that. Boy, that gave us a lot of propaganda material.
Yeah.
So we got the Nazi guy being in government in the West, and we got the Americans that are supporting that Western country. So there's a lot of Nazism and evil coming from there. This was not worth the information that Galen and his organization was able to share with the CIA and American military. Was a really, really bad move. And there were a couple of other Nazis. At one point, the Chancellor of West Germany was a ex-member of the Nazi Party. Kurt Georg Kiesinger was known to have been a member of the Nazi Party. Dumb, completely dumb, which gave a lot of propaganda material to us, to the eastern side. There's some similarity without getting into detail. Right now, we are giving Vladimir Putin a lot of ammunition to stay in power. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get into this. If you want to talk about this later,
we'll get that on the tail end for sure. No, that is incredible. I mean, even thinking about that too. So in a lot of ways, and I actually was just about to go this direction as well, kind of understanding, what your guys' outlook was on World War II. Did it really feel like, even though a lot of people would look at World War II as we defeated the bad guys, we defeated Hitler,
we was the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a little bit of help from the Allies, but it was the Soviet Union. Well, this is probably historically true, because if the Soviets don't march in with that strength force in the East, the Nazis could have concentrated on the Western Front and possibly would have defeated the Allies there. Particularly, it would have given them more time to develop the nuclear missile that they were working on, and they were, I believe, ahead of everybody else.
So that's continuing with that question. Did it feel like the war had never really truly ended as well, because the party you guys were going against, or Hitler's Germany, had just integrated to the West?
It very quickly became the Cold War. Now, the two Germans separated rather quickly, and it was started by the West by introducing its own currency. And I think the West Germany was founded before East Germany. We initially, the East German national anthem goes like, at the end says, Deutschland einig Vaterland, Germany, united Germany, something like that. That was still the dream of the communists, to have a socialist, say communist, united Germany. And that was blocked by the West. And so then we switched real quick and aggressively said, okay, now we're going to be the bulwark against the West, the one that is at the front line in what appears to be a new war coming at us, which turned into a multi-decades-long Cold War.
Man, that is incredible. So what was your guys' perspective then at this time as well of some of the key figures from World War II on the Soviet side? someone like Joseph Stalin or Lenin, but
Well,
specifically with
Lenin,
Stalin.
Lenin had nothing to do with World War II. He passed away in 1924.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like the key figures that
But Lenin was my absolute hero because he was portrayed as such when in fact he was quite evil. We just didn't know it because when we read Lenin's collective works, they were edited. And for instance, that he started the Red Terror, which fundamentally was killing as many enemies of the revolution as possible, but there was no justification. There was a bunch of criminal elements and radical revolutionaries who had no problem going after people and killing them just because sometimes they didn't like him or sometimes they wanted to have what they had. And if they were enemies of the revolution, could have been enemies of the revolution because they were peasants or farmers that didn't want to be collectivized. So none of we knew, but we knew that Lenin sacrificed his health and eventually died as a victim of the counter-revolution. He was assassinated. There was an assassination attempt, and eventually he became very sickly and passed away early. And we knew that Stalin was our hero, at least in early childhood. When he passed away, I forgot, I was probably in elementary school, and I remember this situation when my parents and one of the school teachers that lived nearby, we were sitting around the radio, and it was Stalin's funeral. And there was this Chopin's funeral march, which, made a huge impression on me. It goes like da 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 da. I promise I won't sing again.
No, I know exactly.
And there was hushed silence, and I asked my father afterwards, and there was Russian commentary, like low voice, and then German translation, and I knew that God had just died. And my father explained to me that, that this was the man responsible for the wonderful life that we were going to have. That changed. I think it was in 1956 when Khrushchev went out and actually told the truth about Stalin to the world. He forgot to tell the truth about himself because he was indeed a Stalinist himself.
Yeah.
But Stalin was one of the heroes. Was a general who actually, I forgot his name by now, but he was a major general on the Western Front, and he arrested Lavrenti Beria, the much hated head of the KGB at the time. He was because Beria was also characterized as a shoike, as a bad guy. Okay, so these were the figures that come to mind when you were talking about World War II. I didn't get much involved into the study of the military, so I can't talk about all of the others and who played an important role. I can't answer that question if it came.
Yeah, no, it's just more out of curiosity because, we tend to hear these historical figures. I mean, Stalin's the most notorious example of, the world, obviously, especially now, knows what atrocities were committed, but it's amazing where, in your situation growing up, propagandized, you don't see those things. You only see the positive stuff they want to see. We see it in North Korea now. Many will look at,
yes,
Kim Jong-un as.
Yes, when you look at the way the military is marching at certain holidays, national holidays, North Korea, the people are smaller and they look different, but the orchestration and the symmetry, and everybody is like marionettes marching down the road and everybody looking the same and everybody does the same at the same time. Very similar to the way the Nazis did it. Mm-hmm. and also these big events, big show events in East Germany as well as in the Soviet Union, like when they had like sports events, like for instance the Olympic Games, or a big show. The Nazis put on a big show. Same thing. Dictatorships do that. We don't do it that much. We are a little more rough around the edges. Thank God.
I was gonna say, we make it a little bit simpler. So I want to jump into the KGB recruitment process, but kind of a question that leads us into that would be, growing up or in high school, obviously when it came on your radar, but is the possibility of being a KGB agent? We talked about how they were viewed when you're growing up. Is that like a viable career path, or was that kind of something that you had to be chosen for, and if you weren't?
That was as far from my mind as Johannesburg is distance from here. Mm-hmm. Not even a clue. Even Stasi, I wasn't thinking of becoming one of those, heroes that they depicted on the TV. No, that was fantasy. I was wired to become a college professor because my parents were both teachers. I have teaching and mentoring in my blood. I always liked helping people out. I started teaching when I was in high school. I started tutoring young kids in lower grades for pay too. That was my career plan. I had nothing else in mind, nothing whatsoever. And even if you did, you wouldn't know how to start, because for those kinds of jobs, both the Stasi and the KGB recruited. You could not apply.
That's what I was going to ask, yeah.
You could not. You wouldn't even know what door to knock on. I think the Stasi recruited, period, but for every one of their employees, also the ones that did the internal stuff, the nasty, the evil stuff, the oppression of resistance and counter opinions and so forth. But the KGB, not even in my wildest dreams.
Mm-hmm. So, again, before jumping into that recruiting process, when do you think that they first, or I guess actually to start it, when do you think they first started getting their eyes on you?
All right. I don't have conclusive proof, and there is conflicting information. There's my guess, and there's my friend telling me that he originated then. My best friend in high school, really smart guy, smarter than me, and he joined the party while still in high school. My best friend in college. Did I say high school? I correct myself. He was a volunteer for the Stasi already as we entered college. And over time, he figured that I would be material for the Stasi to recruit. And he thinks the Stasi then shared that information with the KGB. And I have indirect proof that they did not. And I tell you why. I am convinced that even though Stasi and KGB cooperated closely, they kept things secret from one another. They didn't trust one another. Mm-hmm. That mistrust was inbuilt into the KGB, was also inbuilt into the Stasi. It came from the roots of having operated as communists illegally with these small groups of 3 to 4 individuals and only one person who knew all the members of the groups and would have a contact with another group. So if one of the other guys were caught, they couldn't betray anybody, or only like the members of the group. So the secrecy was built into the model. How they operated it was heritage. And so the indirect proof I have is initially the KGB recruited me clearly with the intent of sending me to West Germany. That was at a time when the Stasi had 1,000 people in West German government. Why did they need their own guy? Mm-hmm. Okay? So I think my educated guess is superior to what my friend claimed. He probably wanted to get a little bit of the glory because he told me that after we reconnected after so many years. And God rest his soul, he passed away a year ago. So they did pretty much something similar to the CIA. They were looking for people, college students, that were at elite colleges, universities. And the school that I attended to was one of the elites in East Germany. And the one thing that the CIA probably doesn't have, the Stasi had access to, they kept records of people that were important to them to keep records of, like dissidents, but also cadre, people who could be somebody important in the future, party leadership, government, what have you, Stasi itself. So there were files on us. And I believe that the KGB had access to those files. And that is when they found out that A, I was an A student, B, that I had received in my junior year the highest scholarship of the country that was restricted to a limited number of concurrent holders. I mean, it marked me as intellectual elite, but I also was very active in the communist movement. There were nothing but pluses in my file, no question marks at all. And I had no relatives in the West. That was important as well. So they figured, we got to talk to this guy. And so they did. I think that is how this came about. And then people think, well, then immediately recruitment started. Not even close. They knew what they knew. They knew that I was smart, and they knew that I was ideologically sound, but they didn't know that I had what it takes to what they were looking for. And this is material for the kind of job that is arguably the most difficult one, excepting the ones that require violence, okay? But as far as doing just intellectual type espionage, the most difficult one is being undercover illegal and by yourself. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that required a number of character traits that they had to find out whether I had them. Because, for instance, I was a very adventurous person as a child. You have to have a sense of adventure. They called it, they were looking for a well-controlled sense of adventure. How do I know this? There were a couple of interviews that ex-heads of the Directorate S gave where they, after the KGB had fallen apart, and so they talked about how they were recruiting for these jobs. They literally looked through a couple of thousand candidates to find one that might be worth taking another look. I was one of those. So they were looking for things like, and I don't remember them all, but sharp, mentally sharp, quick decision maker, having no problems with change, fluid situations, whatever, having the ability to improvise very quickly on the spot when you're in a difficult situation. No problem with being alone by yourself or minor problems. And when you put it all together, this is what they're checking for. Did I have it? 18 months it took them before they said to themselves, we got to recruit this guy. And I thought when I was recruited, that was the end of it, but it was not. We can get there. I want to give you a chance to just add another question along those lines here.
Yeah, no, we're going to get there as well, too. But I did want to ask, I guess, you were just hiding that from a macro point of view. What do you think made the ideal KGB agent?
Well, again, it depends upon the kind of a job. It had to be somebody who had a strong foundation in communist ideology. Because other than, most of those KGB agents that operated in the West were under diplomatic cover. So what kind of a risk did they take? Yeah, they took the risk of, having failed. And you don't really fail well in the KGB. So that probably if you are careless and FBI finds you and you get kicked out of the country, you don't come home to a medal, okay? Your career is you're gonna wind up maybe in an office someplace unless you have some connections. So what required of them was ideology and smarts and the ability to judge people, work with people, and also be trainable. They had to have, they had to be good in tradecraft. All of us got very similar, if not identical, tradecraft training. I didn't get, and none of us, I don't know, I want to call them the intellectual spies, people that didn't engage in assassinations or like sabotage. None of us had weapons training. What for? You're going to shoot it out with the FBI? But for people like me, again, I told you what distinguished me from them, and it was worlds apart because of the danger I was involved in. For instance, for me to actually sign up knowing that there's a good chance I might wind up in jail, and knowing that I would be steadfast enough to stay in jail and wait for them to get me out. So all of this had to be taken into consideration. Ironically, we talked on the side before this interview that trust was not was not well extended to agents, no matter who they were. Like the KGB was ruled by mistrust. And it wasn't just me saying it. There's people who operated inside the KGB and had more knowledge of that. Ironically, at one point, they had to trust me. They had to trust me. They couldn't check on me. So they had to trust everything that I told them to be the truth, because otherwise I couldn't function as an illegal, because I was way too vulnerable for those diplomats/agents checking on me, because they were under suspicion and possibly being investigated and followed. And if they lead the FBI to me, then I'm busted. That's the last thing the KGB wanted, to have somebody like me in jail. Not because they cared about me, but it became a huge headache because they had to get me out. Now you got to ask the question, why? You already know the question. You know the answer. Mm-hmm. I know you know the answer. If they don't get me out, they don't get another one to sign up for that job. Mm-hmm. And they had a track record of getting people out, and I knew that. I met 2 agents that spent 10 years in a jail in UK that they got out. Very famous Morris and Lana Cohen, American citizens who were initially the members of the Rosenberg spy ring. They managed to get out before the Rosenbergs were arrested, because otherwise they probably could have faced the death penalty too. And they were redeployed in the UK and arrested, and they got out. So, and I knew I would get out. So, but getting back, they actually had to trust me, and that trust backfired.
Yeah, well,
not to, no spoiler alert.
Yeah. Okay, well, because that's actually just about where I was going to go as well. We talked about this at breakfast. The idea of, I've had plenty of CIA across the board. Whether they're in GRS running security for the intel gathering spies, whether they're operating as illegals. Which I guess, could you define what that difference is between illegals and?
All right. So there are 3 types of spies, and I'm not including in that group the individuals who are involved in black ops and wet ops. Black ops are overthrowing governments and stuff like that, and wet ops are killing somebody, right? So no, I'm talking about the other spies. So there are 3 of them. There are the ones with diplomatic cover, and the majority during the Cold War of KGB spies, vast majority of KGB spies in the West were diplomats. Then there were NOCs, and there are today NOCs, non-official cover, that are people who use their own name, but they pretend to be and they are engaged in certain activity that is their cover, such as nowadays, you could have Russian businessmen here, you could have Russian artists, dancers, whatever, anybody who has a good reason to be in the other country, but actually also operating as spies. And they are vulnerable to arrest. So they have to be a little bit more careful than the diplomats. And then there are the illegals. And the illegals are coming in under a different name and operating totally unprotected and are more vulnerable because they have to play to be somebody they're not. And in my case, it was even more sophisticated. I also changed mother tongues and the country of birth. The majority of illegals, as far as I know, and I think that is pretty correct, were moved to the United States through another country because I had an unusual talent to acquire the English language as spoken by Americans to a point where the accent is so minimal that it was explainable, particularly in New York.
That's true.
I give you the answer right now. What the explanation was, Jack Barsky's real mother, her maiden name was Schwartz.
Mm-hmm.
So when people ask me, and a couple of times it happens, "Oh, you're European, you have a bit of an accent," and I know I still do, and I would say, "Yeah, I know. I grew up bilingual. My mother was German," and I had proof if somebody had to ask.
Yeah.
So it was very convincing. So I was a real unusual individual in that I changed everything, and as compared to in 2010, 10 Russian illegals were arrested and eventually then exchanged for prisoners over there in Russia, and they were smuggled through other countries. I think Canada and or Brazil, and the Russians still do this today. And here's the thing: when the KGB tried to get a birth certificate of an American who had passed away in early life for me to use, they were initially unsuccessful. So, and I was now waiting to be deployed. It was time. And they sent me back to Berlin and told me, study Portuguese and read as much as you can about Brazil. They never told me why, and I didn't bother to guess, but the plan was to get me through Brazil. Mm-hmm. And then somebody found the Barsky certificate, the gravestone in the graveyard, and was able to acquire the birth certificate. Big security hole, isn't it?
It is.
There's a guy who speaks with a Russian accent, okay? And he shows up and he fills out a form and he pays money, and he doesn't have to give ID. He doesn't have to answer any questions why he is entitled to initially get the death certificate of a born American. Huh? I'm sorry. Somebody was asleep at the helm there.
No, I want to dive into ghost names. I actually have that highlighted, and we're going to get to that when we get more into when you start, getting some of these different identities that we're going to utilize. But bringing us back, as you were highlighting, and we talked about this at breakfast, the idea of trust. And I was saying with CIA, there seems to be more trust within the agency. There seems to be a connection going up that the mission's known.
Yeah.
But, we're speaking about this. You were being told by your handlers something that they were probably being told something different. Like the levels of secrecy seemed a lot more siloed.
Let me chime in here. You're damn if you do, and you're damn if you don't. Mm. If you distrust everybody, that ultimately becomes a dysfunctional organization. But trusting somebody resulted in Aldrich Ames being the most successful agent for the KGB during the Cold War. So now what? So you gotta find a
fine balance.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask, why do you think the KGB, and you even had like the Stasi at some example, why do you think that they built that foundation of distrust, or were built on that foundation of just that extra veil of secrecy throughout the organization?
Well, apparently they had enough evidence that people can't be trusted. So in the early days of the revolution, there were these, not the revolution, post-revolution, there was Lenin, and then there were factions. And as soon as Lenin died, the factions were working against one another, and Stalin eventually took over. And he was super paranoid. And the reason that he fundamentally died in bed was that, nobody dared to start a conspiracy to overthrow him because they all didn't trust one another. So that was built into the system. And obviously the KGB was the implementer of Stalin's policies. So the distrust was inherited. Mm-hmm. Okay? Whereas, the United States has, I call it the national DNA, has trust in the national DNA simply because we have never, as a nation, never been invaded. The continental U.S. has never been invaded by a foreign force, so we're trusting foreigners, and so we are just like nicer to one another. There have been periods when distrust developed, Civil War particularly, but also post-World War II with the McCarthy era. But eventually that dissipated. And we have a foundation, a Judeo-Christian foundation, that where love plays a very, very important role. And so if you can't love really unless you also trust. So this is all cultural and not necessarily just, can't blame the CIA to be too trusting or the KGB to be too mistrusting. It's historic. And by the way, you're actually managing to ask me to think on the fly. You're asking some questions that, how do I answer that? I think I'm doing pretty okay.
No, I think you're doing a great job. I mean, it's such an interesting juxtaposition between the two, because the two enemies on either side not only had ideological differences in terms of economies, it wasn't communism versus capitalism, but even if you boil it down to the agencies themselves, their ideologies on how they were run are so massively different. And obviously that scales even to, the agents themselves, how the agents were operating on the ground, who they were operating with, and the individuals that you want to recruit to be able to even be a part of it.
The one thing we have in common is tradecraft and acknowledgement, if not admiration, to a honest agent, a successful agent of the other side. And honest means somebody who served the cause rather than serving himself or for the money. We all despise people who work for money.
I love that. So let's jump back into your early recruiting process. You were highlighting there was that 18th month time frame. So if you could maybe walk us through that, but then also in your personal life, there's obviously certain dynamics going on as well that, of course, as you were just highlighting, the ideas of love and trust and relationship building. If you could speak to that as well, and why that obviously may conflict with.
Well, my parents had been divorced for quite some time. They divorced while I was in high school. So I didn't have a functioning family anymore. My mother got remarried, but, that was a stepdad, and I was in college. I never really got to know him very well. My brother and I had no relationship, so there was no family that could have held me back. My first girlfriend, at the time, the love of my life, my college sweetheart, who I knew I was going to get married, had broken up with me rather unceremoniously. And so for the first couple of years in college, I didn't even look at another girl. I was devastated. Mm-hmm. I didn't look for love. I didn't look for friendships. I just studied. My ambition was everything. that described me to a T, an ambitious guy. And then I had a couple of girlfriends, but nothing major. By the time I was recruited, I had a steady girlfriend, but I didn't love her. She loved me, and she was good looking, and I got a lot of compliments from my friends and fellow students, and that's like something to brag about. But I also had, as part in a one-night stand, fathered a child out of wedlock. That is a black spot in my history, because what happened was it appeared based on the invitation of a classmate of mine when we were walking back. She was actually going this way and I was going that way. I was going to my dorm and she was going to hers, and we were holding a hand and she squeezed a hand. And I took her up on that. And then she became pregnant, and I behaved like an idiot. I was a coward. Eventually, over time, it took maybe six months before the baby was born to actually speak with her. I was passing her, on university grounds, and I would look the other way. I felt ashamed. I was guilty, and I wasn't in love with her. She was not the kind of girl I wanted to marry. She was crazy in love with me. I didn't even know that. I was that dumb in the time. College friend of mine, we were in the same lab together. He at one point sort of hinted at something, and he said, there's a guy here in this lab who doesn't even know that Edeltraud, that was her name, loves him dearly. I said, yeah, he's a real idiot. I thought it was another guy. I was that dense in those days. So that was my personal circumstances at the time. There was no strong love interest. Nothing held me. The only thing that really held me as far as personal relationships, believe it or not, was my basketball team. Mm. I was crazy about that team. We bonded so much. We were a pretty decent team. We traveled a lot. And so we traveled and drank beer a lot, and we smoked cigarettes after the game in those days. And that was my family, because I didn't have a family anymore. And that separation was the hardest for me when I eventually said yes. So that ends sort of that part of my situation. I can go on now how the recruitment actually went about. Yeah, but first maybe a little more about how Herman tested me, and because there were some rough tests that I had to pass.
Yeah, I was just about to go.
I had to do some uncomfortable things, and the most uncomfortable was when he told me to find out about a relative from the West, a relative to some of the residents in the town where I studied. So he gave me an address and a name, and he told me, find out what you can find about this individual. He's a cousin of either the woman or the man in that house, and he may come to visit. He would be of interest. We would want to recruit him. So I was socially shy in those days. I wasn't shy when I was amongst people that I knew, but strangers, that was really awkward for me. But, I can't fail, right? So I said, all right, let me see how. And I had to be inventive now. I got no advice how to go about it. So I figured out, okay, how about, being a sociology student? I had a full beard in those days. And writing a paper, and I do a opinion survey for this paper to be based on. So I didn't even do a test. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The lady comes out, and I introduced myself. And I asked her if she wouldn't mind answering some questions. And, typically, I didn't know that I was likable at the time. I had no clue. But in hindsight, every time I was talking with a stranger, and that happened a couple more times, I got really good traction. And I thought, well, that's normal. Nobody ever told me, fed me back that, like, you have a lot of things going for you, your personality. So anyway, and I had constructed the questions in such a way that eventually they would get to a point where she would volunteer things. Like there was a little bit about, the comparison of living standard, whether she was aware of there was a standard of living is different in the West and the East. And I said, because personally, I don't have a clue because I don't get these packages that some of my neighbors get from Western relatives, and I'm looking what they're getting. It looks pretty good. I would like to have one like that. She would say, "Oh yeah, we get them. With Norbert, he's sending us something. Oh, interesting. What does he do?" So on and on and on, and eventually
like leading questions.
Yeah, leading questions, and she fell for it like hook, line, and sinker. And that Herman, that was the fellow whose cover name he used, the guy who gave me that task. He said, "Job well done." And then he gave me another one similar. He showed me a building in downtown, mid-sized building, maybe four floors up, and it apparently was an office building that only had one organization in it, but there was no sign on the door or anything like that. I said, "Find out what's in there, what they're doing." I had to be creative again. And so there was a bus stop right next to that building. And the bus stop was covered, so to protect you from the elements. And there was a bench inside. So I left my briefcase on the bench. And with some college papers, some chemistry stuff that I could lose if somebody were to steal the bag. And a day later, I rang the bell. And I asked him if by any chance anybody collected a briefcase, and I described it. And there was the briefcase. And then I engaged him, the person, it was a male, in a little bit of small talk. I found out what they're doing. So apparently, this ability to be creative was very important, because you had to make things up. And different situations require different stories, backstories. I didn't know that I had a chance. I had a talent to be a storyteller. Oh boy, can I tell stories! And there's a lot of things I didn't know about myself. I was just playing around, it worked. It got a little more dicey down the road when I was already a member of the KGB, but I'm not going to go there right now. And the one thing. And as we were talking, we had a lot of man-to-man talks. He was 10 years older than me, Herman, and I shared everything with him like he was my father, Arsat's dad. And what I think impressed him the most was, again, hindsight. And the summer vacation after our junior year, my best friend and I decided to hitchhike all the way from East Germany to Bulgaria, the Black Sea. Now, you may know that was one heck of an adventure. Yeah. Because in those days, there weren't a lot of cars on the road, and hitchhiking was very rare. Most vehicles wouldn't stop if you stand by the road, and you wouldn't do this, you would do that. Mm-hmm. And most cars would just ignore you. And we were going through the Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, into Bulgaria. We spoke none of those languages. We had visas for the countries that we were passing through that were limited to something like 5 days. We had to get past there in 5 days, or we would be sent back. And we had limited amount of local currency that we were able to exchange. And we went. I borrowed a pair of jeans from a friend of mine because we knew we would most likely have to sleep outside several times, and we did. And we had a backpack, and we didn't even have maps. We needed to buy the maps locally. So we got on a train. We went into Czechoslovakia, and then we placed ourselves by the roadside. And after a while, we figured out we were on the wrong side of the road. We were going to go the other way. So eventually, we took a bus into Prague, and there we found accommodation at a hostel. We had 2 French ladies as roommates. I remember all of this very well, and my friend actually wrote a diary. I have that. And then the next day, we got serious, and we stood by the roadside for several hours until somebody stopped. And so then it went on and on and on. It was one heck of an adventure. We made it all the way back, all the way through and all the way back with some damage. I had caught, I don't know, I had caught some parasite, some bug that was crawling around my body and around the hairy parts everywhere. But other than that, everything fine. And when I shared that with Herman, he must have really been impressed because, we went into the unknown and made it all the way through. Very rare, okay? So that's when they eventually decided, this guy's worth recruiting. He's got everything. And they were right. Even though I was never given a psychological exam, I never met a KGB psychologist. They had these decent instincts to what to look for.
When did you recognize that you had those qualities? Was it afterwards?
After I quit.
Mm-hmm. Really?
After I and it took even more time. When I quit, I had a family, so I didn't have time to engage in introspection. I just now I was my reason for being, my passion was to build the American dream for my family. I had a girl at the time, and then I was married to the woman I already mentioned, the one who was from South America, the mother of the girl. And I said, well, let's have another child and, buy a house. And I was focused on that. This was my mission. And I totally wanted to forget that I ever was an agent, because I resigned from the KGB and I did not have the courage to inform the FBI because I was afraid I would wind up in jail. And there was a good chance I could have, okay? So I did not realize it until after the FBI and I started working together, and then I started analyzing. But the analysis actually got a lot deeper when I started writing my memoirs, which eventually, became a published book. And I was interviewed by so many people like you which made me think more and more and more. And so the total understanding of self happened maybe the last 2 years.
Really? Wow. That's incredible. Well, I guess moving forward then, so you were able to take on a lot of these different challenges and implement creativity where it was needed, which in itself is, it showcases your ability to do that job because very few people would have been able to think. Even that bus stop idea is incredible. The idea of leaving the bag and they grab it, and it's a natural human interaction in that case, yet you're still able to grab that information.
My interview with Social Security, because I came to the U.S., the only document I had was a certified copy of the Jack Barsky birth certificate. Getting a driver's license was easy. You just needed to have proof of residence, and I had that. to acquire this was a long story, but this would get too long. Eventually, I was able to get a library card. The instructions from the KGB how to get this were all wrong, so I had to find a way to get through what didn't work. But I got that, and then all you had to prove in New York is that you can drive and parallel park. Okay, so that was easy. But in order to get a Social Security card, you had to interview. Mm-hmm. And in those days, it was possible to get a Social Security card if you were at a reasonably advanced age. There was no assignment of Social Security numbers at birth because there were two sectors of the population that were exempt from Social Security law. That was employees of religious organizations and farm workers. So, and the KGB knew that, so they had me drop out of high school, my backstory, then and work for a chemical company for a while. So, to cover up my chemical knowledge that I had. They never thought I should get into chemistry, but just like to combine this because I can throw out some, to just prove that I was in a chemical company. And of course, that company didn't exist anymore, that had blown up. They found it somewhere in some kind of an archive. So that was pretty clever. And then they had me move because of headaches. And my mother had passed away. And I had migraine headaches because of chemical exposure or whatever. So I moved up north and worked on a farm for many years. So now I come to New York, headaches gone. I'm going to try and see if I can make it in New York City. I knew that I could not be myself in there. I could not have bright, shiny eyes, and I could not be bright and well-dressed. I had to be somebody who just jumped off a potato truck. So I acted that. First of all, I prepared for the interview by asking myself out loud in a park where nobody else was around questions that could be asked and answered them. So that was the intellectual preparation for a tough interview. But I also morphed into the country boy. And again, that was my idea. I was never instructed that way. So, so I dressed down, a T-shirt with an oil stain, worn jeans. I didn't shave for 3 days in a row, stubble, and I didn't comb my hair. In those days, I had hair, lots of it, and I rubbed soap into my eyes to make them red. And this is how I showed up. And the lady asked, oh, I see that you're, 38 years old? I thought it was in that neighborhood. Uh-huh. So what? Did you ever work? Yeah. What did you do? Well, I spent 12 years on Miller's farm. I did everything there. So you didn't need a Social Security card? What? No. Why? Nobody will ask me. Okay. That was it. So I also dumbed down my speech, low key and
very disinterested too.
It was inventive inventive as well as acting. So and to their credit, I think the KGB folks anticipated that I would be behaving that way.
I mean, that brings it right back to you showcase that ability with doing things like the bus stop or going in with leading questions when you're doing that initial interview.
Yeah, and then I proved that I was a really, really good liar. Mm-hmm. And I said this in my first interview with CBS, that when I was asked, were you a good liar? And I said, yeah, the best, but it's because I'm fundamentally honest. So when I lie, it doesn't show. I'm not a habitual liar. I lied for a cause, okay? I could lie nowadays, but why? I'm doing well with the honest truth. I
guess bringing it back, so you completed all these different asks where they're kind of probing you to see, do you have the makings of an agent, as we're, highlighting here, which it's funny that you say it took so long to really recognize, because it's like in my head, I'm like, I would be thinking, you're accomplishing all these tasks better than I'm sure pretty much anyone they're setting out to do them. That would be, if the leadership's looking at you and being like, yep, this is the guy. So it is funny that it like didn't even necessarily associate there. But so what were the next steps in terms of that initial reach out after you kind of were able to showcase you had
Well,
the makings?
I never asked, by the way. The one time I asked a question, I pissed Herman off because I asked him, "Is your real name German?" And you just say Herman. Well, I shouldn't have asked that, because that was German was most likely not his real first name. And he says, like, don't ask questions like that ever again. Oh, okay. So I knew I would just like respond. And, the independent spirit I was well in control. I was just waiting what's going to happen. And I never, even while I was working with Herman, never even confronted myself with a question. God forbid if they one day ask you, let's go, or tell you let's go, or ask you, are you ready to be deployed? I toyed with the idea, but it was far away from me. And I was still the guy with a career with lots and lots of opportunity also to join the government or leadership of the party. I mean, I had all these opportunities, and I was well respected in that college town, pretty much well respected across the board. Okay, so yeah, so I was not prepared to be recruited officially, but it did happen, obviously.
What were the circumstances in terms of that recruitment? Did they, in terms of like, what was that initial reach out like? And
well,
I guess
what
was the pressure with it too?
This was another situation where I was unprepared. And I was unprepared for a lot of things because, again, I told you quick decision-making, quick thinking was important. And they would, several times they would go one way and be engaged in boring talk. And I said, why am I here? And then all of a sudden switch. So this is what happened. It was just about in the 18-month range. Herman told me, we decided to send you to Berlin for a couple of weeks for some extra training because we don't have enough manpower here to train you and skill sets. So I moved to Berlin. I took a vacation or it was a leave of absence. They gave me a forged document that I had to party wanted me in Berlin, whatever, something like that. And so I met my first handler, who was not Herman, for a little bit. I had my first secret meeting, and he did give me some training. It was somewhat superficial. He gave me some tasks very similar to what Herman gave me. I didn't learn a whole lot more, and so I'm thinking, why am I here? Well, I found out the day next to the last day of my 2 weeks why I was there, and that was the big surprise. This fellow took me to the Soviet Army headquarters in Berlin, and that was also the KGB headquarters. And I still remember going through a gate and then going down a long, dark hallway, and then he opened a big door to an office, and that was one heck of an office. The richest office I ever set foot into. That includes university professor and senior people offices. It had nothing but expensive antique furniture and artwork, communist propaganda, of course, and a bronze bust of Felix Dzerzhinsky on the table. And behind the desk was this short guy, diminutive guy. This much of him showed above the desk. Totally unimpressive. But the moment he said hello, it was like, oh. There was a steely voice that indicated that a very, very high psychological, very high level of psychological energy. He knew, and he displayed the fact that he was in charge. And then he started with a small talk, in Russian, by the way. I understood enough Russian, school Russian, but occasionally I just asked my handler to translate. And it was this communist propaganda. I'm thinking, what the heck is he talking about this? I'm here because I know all of this stuff. And then he switched like abruptly. And I don't know the exact words, and they had to be translated anyway. But, so are you ready to go? Are you in? And this was, as I said, unexpected. And I was not prepared for the answer. So I stalled. I said, I don't know if I'm qualified, and clearly I'm not well trained yet. And he said, well, you don't worry about this. We know that you're qualified, and we will train you. But we only work with people who can make important decisions quickly. So I give you until tomorrow noon to come up with an answer. It can be either yes or no. Now, that made for a sleepless night. So I remember like it was yesterday. My handler dropped me off at the edge of a park, and I had to go through a sandy path to get to what is the equivalent of an Airbnb, where I slept the nights, and there were no people in the park, and I needed to talk to somebody, so I talked to the trees. I looked up, it's like I'm talking to God. Give me an answer here already. I don't remember the dialogue. I just know they didn't talk back. Yeah. And I went with the pluses and cons, and it was a sort of a rational attempt to analyze, and have like I used to do this quite often. When I had two choices, I would have column A and column B, and would write weights in favor. Like I would give weights, numeric weights from 1 to 10. 10 is really favored for this particular category. And then I would add it all up, and whichever column had the highest score, I thought I would go with. And guess what? I always threw it away. Same here. All my decisions were fundamentally emotional, even though there was rationale behind it, but I wasn't fully aware of the rationale that came much later. Okay? So eventually I woke up, and I had a sleepless night. I didn't sleep much anyway, but I got some sleep. I met my handler, and I said, yeah, let's go. If you want to know what were the most decisive factors in hindsight, obviously, I already told you that I was going to be a communist hero. Mm-hmm. And there were communist heroes that I admired that were not just spies. People who died for my Ernst Thälmann, the head of the Communist Party, who was executed in the concentration camp, and many others. There was, and I was going to be one of them, and I was going to be a James Bond, live the good life, and you have my cake and eat it too. Mm-hmm. And of course, my ego got flattered so much by being recruited by the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet. I had to be really good. And so that fundamentally tipped the scale relatively easily at that point. I could swallow leaving my basketball team. There was too much adventure on the other side. Adventure was obviously to travel the world, getting to see cities that I wanted to see, that the West was closed to us ordinary citizens. So all of this was just an offer that was too hard to say no to. And I had no idea what I really signed up for.